panels, which we're going to be moving on to right now. So if we could please have our panelists join us, I will give a quick introduction to everybody, this very illustrious panel, and then hand it over to the moderator. So we have with us His Excellency Dr. Shekhar Dutt, Senate Medal winner, who's very well known to all of us here. Dr. Dutt has served as the Governor of Chhattisgarh, Defense Secretary, Center for Defense Production, and Deputy National Security Advisor. He's been the Chancellor of 11 state universities, aligning with his keen interest in the field of higher education and promoting scientific and intellectual thinking amongst the youth and teaching communities. And he is the patron of GCTC. We also have Lieutenant General M.U. Nair, who's the Commandant of the Military College of Telecommunication Engineering. Hello, sir. Good to see you. General Nair has a vast experience both in the technical arm of the Corps of Signals and General Staff matters of the Indian Army. He's also held appointments as Additional Director General, Signals Intelligence, Chief of Staff of Corps Command. The General has a rich experience in the domains of cyber warfare, military operations, signals intelligence, and information technology related matters at the national and international level. Additionally, joining us, I think from here in North America, we have Michael Chertoff. Thank you very much for getting up early for this, sir. Mr. Chertoff served as the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, where he led the federal government's efforts to protect from a wide range of security threats. Earlier in his career, Mr. Chertoff served as a federal judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals and was head of the U.S. Department of Justice Criminal Division. He's chair of the board of Freedom House and co-founder and executive chairman of the Chertoff Group. Colonel Grant Newsham is also joining us at very short notice. Thank you, sir. He's a senior research fellow for the Japan Forum for Security Studies in Tokyo and the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C. He's a retired U.S. Marine colonel and was the first U.S. Marine liaison officer to the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force. In that role, he was instrumental in developing Japan's amphibious capability. Colonel Newsham previously served as the Reserve G2 Intelligence and G5 Plans and Policy at Marine Forces Pacific, and also served on 2 occasions as the U.S. Marine Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. He's a former U.S. Foreign Service officer, and he spent 2019 as the MOFA-sponsored Taiwan Fellow researching options for improving Taiwan's defense. We're also lucky to have Commodore Sujit Samadar, who's retired as Principal Director of Naval Plans. He's been an international fellow at the Japan Institute for International Affairs in Tokyo, and he was also a fellow at USI. He's an alumni of the United Nations University in Tokyo and several other international universities. He's presently advisor at FICCI and distinguished fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi. Rounding out the panel, we have Mr. Shiva Kumar, who's a member of the senior research staff at the Central Research Laboratory at Bharat Electronics in Bangalore, and your chairman, who will be ably guiding you all through this incredibly knowledgeable panel, is Air Marshal Sukhchain Singh, VSM, highly decorated air officer in charge of maintenance, air headquarters, and former SMS maintenance in the Air Force. So over to you, Air Marshal, for what a fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all and good morning to 2 of the panelists from the Western side. Very interesting panel and a very interesting and a core topic of this particular GCTC seminar of this session. We have got about an hour and a half to go. So I would request each speaker to limit his opening remarks to about 8 minutes. And thereafter, we'll have a shorter discussion depending upon how the clarifications and other things move in. And if there are little questions between each one of you. Before I set the ball rolling, let me start with a small quote. A quote by Eliezer Yudkowsky. He said, "By far the greatest danger of artificial intelligence is that people conclude very early that they understand it." We have been hearing lots and lots of speakers talk about AI, big data analysis, and the sorts which is going to revolutionize the conduct of war. One must be able to understand what is AI, what is big data in the context of militaries. This is very important. So during the course of the seminar, I'm sure some of these issues will get addressed. We had the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Air Staff, and as well, not forgetting that the CDS had spoken about artificial intelligence and big data analysis in the role they're going to play in the Indian Defense Forces. Where do we stand? In the case of India, we did have the Niti Aayog's vision for AI in 2018. That vision that does not talk about the military per se, but talks about the governance aspects, which is linked to the digital India aspects. I'm sure Dr. Shekhar Dutt sir would be in a position to elucidate more on that area. As far as the military AI in India is concerned, a defense AI project agency has been set up. We're also envisioning to set up a defense AI council. I'm sorry, the defense AI council has been set up and the agency is going to be set up to ensure that the AI moves in the right direction. Each service headquarters has been given 100 crores for them to start moving in that direction. It's an initial step. I think with those opening remarks, let me hand over the floor to Dr. Shekhar Dutt to make his initial comments, please.
Thank you very much, Air Marshal Sukhchand Singh. Such a pleasure sharing today's proceedings with you and all colleagues. I see Sujit Samadar, Lieutenant General Nair, and of course Michael Chertoff, who, when I was in the Defense Secretary's position, he was one of the first Homeland Security Chief of United States, and I dare say he has framed all the SOPs, standard operating practices of the Homeland Security, and I'm sure that the United States is benefiting of his initial efforts. I also recognize General Nair as the person from the MCTE, where I myself have, as a very young officer, undergone training, and later on I also happened to address their convocation. Why I say MCTE? Because most of the things that we are going to talk now, artificial intelligence, big data, and machine learning, are methods by which communication can be subverted, and through the communication network, the enemy or the adversary can get into our defensive efforts as well as our offensive efforts. And it is this which has to be really seen from the operational point of view and also from the maintenance point of view. And I think, long ago, when we had the joint operation capability, because in the 71 war itself, it was a joint operation. It was not something that was done only by the Army, or the Air Force was in a supportive role. Air Force was very much in this, in the game, and there was also the Navy, and where I was operating was just hardly a few kilometers away, and the naval chaps had come and done a daring raid. So it was a joint operation. So the armed forces do work on joint premises and joint understanding of each other's requirement. But the communication side, I think, is a very, very important aspect. And General Nair would sort of agree that the SONC, Signal Officer in Chief, he plays a very major role, and he has to continue to play an even bigger role in order to establish that each service is talking to each other, as well as also making use of the other services abilities, and thereby making the war not just be part of one service or one corps or one command, but the entire armed forces of India. And there, the role of understanding AI, understanding the big data, how do they, when they are used, improve the capability of the army. One of the most important training aspects which we follow is that we put ourselves in the shoes of the enemy or the and understand that how technology is going to influence its behavior. And therefore, I was very fortunate of hearing Mr. Kamal Sibbal, with whom I worked very closely, especially when he was ambassador uh, in a couple of countries where I was also dealing with their military. Kamal Sibbal's attitude towards understanding the vulnerabilities of China, vulnerability of India, has been to see what are the aspects in which India's main adversary, China, is going to do, and what are they doing, and how are they affecting the rest of the world. Now, this is the same way we have to actually do this and understand the method by which individually the technology can play or is playing to improve the efficiency, improve the reach, improve the ability to hit, improve the ability to for the surveillance, improve the ability to accurately take on what is known as the as the targets, which are VA or VB. Now, all these things are in the domain of any organization, I dare say the army, armed forces of any adversary, because that is what they're supposed to do. Now, how do they benefit by this? How do they employ this technology? How do they make this technology become part of their slave? You know, which can be taken benefit of and used it whenever they want it, wherever they want it. Now, having understood that, the next step has to be that what all things should be done by India, what all things should be done by the Indian armed forces, and what the Marshal Sukhchand Singh was saying, that even though it seems that these technologies are being looked at by the civilian organization, and they're being used for perhaps the civilian, say, transportation industry or the communication industry and all that. But all have a role or to play for the defense. And I think there is a very important factor which our forces need to have, even if they are on listening watch. Even there, I think role play of different organizations and understand how will the adversary take the advantage of the technology, and thereby making the first in chess, which is called gambit, the first move. And the first move actually gives them the advantage if they can do it. What is the first move? In many cases, and we've seen that happening in the American tackling of the Serbian thing in Yugoslavia, when they paralyzed the communication system of the Yugoslav forces, and thereby, without much effort, they could use electronic warfare to the best, and thereby the war actually didn't cause a lot of collateral damage, but it was a war in which a good air force of the Yugoslavs would operate. Now, here is the requirement of the commanders understanding the motives, understanding the way they will they are going to handle these technology. I would say that each of them should not be seen separately. Each of them should be seen together. And how this affects the communication, how does this affect? Now, there are many, of course, benefits of artificial intelligence, and I would say in manufacturing sector, a huge amount of benefits are there in of artificial intelligence. Now, these are not such which will affect they may affect the country's preparation, but it doesn't affect the country's operation. So similarly, big data would be used for taking enormous amount of information and putting them into use. And we know that big data is a potential. What it seems that this data is not useful to the enemy, we have to and we are sort of very generous with those information, and for the enemy they are good information. So another sector which has to be brought in by the right from the time military gets trained, or for that matter even the civilian sectors which are dealing with strategic activities, that there should not be loose talk in the electronic medium. So it should be very, very closely sort of monitored, and people should actually be seeing whether there are loose talks, loose information going, information which is more than what is necessary going, and thereby making use of. Because if I am my adversary, I'll be a fool if I'm not using all this information and use it against you, against myself. And that is the role of a good enemy. And I understand that there is a requirement. This enemy is not such a fool, and therefore I have to honor the ability of the enemy and our adversary and understand. But what are we doing? We are, if we just do not use the technology, then we are again, we are not on time. We have to keep up with the time. We have to use all this technology. Now, artificial intelligence is transforming the world. From how we educate our youth to how economies operate, there exists no shortage of arenas where the experts believe artificial intelligence will have an outsized impact. National security is one of them. And but national security, again, I mean, cannot be taken as an isolated example of the security. Everything together makes the national security. To date, most of the discussions in artificial intelligence's impact on national security strategy have largely focused on the operational levels of the war. That is why I brought it slightly away, that it is not necessary just to see the operational use, but to see the way the adversary, a good adversary, a sensible and a clever adversary would be using the data. And this includes how future wars will be influenced by new military capabilities and how these capabilities will in turn influence conflict on a battlefield. A substantial part of this dialogue at the operational level considers how artificial intelligence will influence the ethics in national security. So in national security, I do not think that we ought to be, we ought to be guarded by that this is the boundary or this is the kind of limits. We have to see it from all. And I have a favorite sort of a method to describe. When you are talking about national security, it should not be just limited to x-axis or y-axis or even z-axis and make it into a form of a cube. It has to be seen as a sphere, and you have protected a sphere and that is your sphere. Now, what is your sphere of influence? You have to then go and protect that. Then, what is the sphere where you want to actually be after say 10 or 20 years? So we have to do that. So your aim, your meaning a country's aim has to be such that it can increase the sphere, and every part of the sphere we should be able to have influence. So I don't know whether I've overshot my tenure of.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It was nice initial opening statement and very rightly hit on the nail with the communication angle. That's where the C3I systems for the military are important. And use of AI in ensuring that the communication security, the communication linkages are established in a very hostile environment is one of the use of the AI which is being progressed very, very aggressively. Thank you, sir. And you raised the issue about strategic AI. We will discuss about that a little later. Thank you very much, sir. We had the Army Chief expound about the setting up of the AI Center of Excellence in NCT. Very interesting. And I'm sure the MCT is working on various aspects of AI's deployment, not only in the communication field, but I'm sure in the various other fields. In the communication side, we have got the Air Force network environment, both audio as well as digital, the satellite communications. And with the new jointness, which is likely to happen, how these assets will move together, and where is the need to get all the AI thoughts of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force together. Maybe MCT could be in a position to lead that way. Over to you, Lieutenant General Nair.
Thank you, Chair. I hope I'm audible. All right.
Yes.
Good evening to you all, gentlemen, Dr. Shekhar Dutt, fellow participants, and all members attending this session at this late hour. It's actually a privilege to attend this webinar on defense and security post-COVID, organized under the aegis of the GCTC. Sir, Dr. Shekhar Dutt, sir, it's nice knowing that you had an association with the MCT, sir, and probably your association, I'm sure, will benefit mutually all of us, including in the fields of communication which you emphasized on. So over the past 2 days, we have been listening to speaker after speaker mentioning about the changing landscape of conflicts from a conventional weapon system heavy mode to a technology dominated conflict mode with threats in emerging niche domains such as cyber space impacting on sovereignty of nation states. The Chief of Army Staff yesterday had called the future conflicts as multi-domain operations, highlighting the abstract nature of warfare. The CDS today mentioned about the battle of attrition giving way to conflicts in the gray zone. Now, as per me, we could call it by any name. It could be gray zone, it could be disruptive, it could be non-contact, it could be hybrid or non-kinetic. But the fact remains that the digital conflict scenario has arrived, with several nations focusing on such technology-intensive operations. Now, how does a country like India, with 15,200 kilometers of land borders and 7,500 kilometers of coastline, protects its territorial integrity in multiple domains of conflict? The answer to this lies in our capability to protect our digital assets, our networks, the services which ride on these networks, the devices which operate on these networks, and the applications which are fielded on these networks, rightly identified by the chair and Dr. Shekhar Dutt. And this is where an adversary attempting to destabilize us would focus his attention on. There is therefore a need to ensure that all our digital assets are protected at all times, with digital infrastructure being updated and modernized to keep pace with such trends and addressing the cyber vulnerabilities. A lot of discussions, debates have taken place on all this in the sessions yesterday, and I'm sure all of us are in the knowledge of the threats to our networks. Now, coming on to how we use our networks and servers to assist in reducing the decision-making cycles about which the artificial intelligence, the data analytics, the machine learning, all of which we have had detailed discussions over the several sessions. The AI and data analytics play a key role in decision making today. And as the chair had mentioned, like the Chief of Army Staff had pointed out yesterday, that the MCTE, the Military College of Telecommunication Engineering, has been identified as the center of excellence in the artificial intelligence domain in the Indian Army. It is for furthering our capabilities in this domain that we have now ventured upon into this particular field with lots of activities, primarily not focused only on the communication domain, but assisting the field formations in executing their operational tasks. That's where we are focusing on. The problem is complex, especially in the surveillance domain, where multiplicity of inputs and complex structures and formats need to be analyzed for cogent decision making in near real time. It's a major challenge since we have a plethora of inputs coming in from multiple sources, multiple locations, multiple languages. So these are challenges, and the database is so large today to arrive at a very, very cogent decision in that near real time is a major challenge which we are looking at. I would address some key challenges before we get into a discussion mode, which the webinar such as this can actually assist us, the users in the armed forces. Firstly, the necessity to give recognition to the challenges in the emerging domains. I think this has been amply demonstrated, highlighted over the past 2 days, with the Army Commander Artrak, in fact, making a mention of our inability to comprehend the nature of multi-domain operations in the recent past. However, to leverage it for our strategic advantage, we need dedicated budgets for expansion and protection of our digital assets. The ICT infrastructure has a major disadvantage of rapid technology obsolescence, and therefore the necessity to have a technology refresher clause in our major communication projects and those using the power of electromagnetic spectrum. Now this we need to somehow build up into our acquisition policy. Today's project on ICT domain needs to be updated every 5 years. That's what I feel. And this is the cost a nation will have to pay for protecting its digital critical infrastructure. Secondly, despite the realization of having been dawned on the necessity to invest in technology and digital India effort, we still have to depend on external sources for our modern electronic systems and equipment, especially in key strategic domains. While the Atmanirbhar campaign has given an impetus in this direction, we still have a long way to go. The defense public sector undertakings such as the BEL, I think one of the panelists is from the BEL today, and the PSUs such as the ITI and our electronic industry need to invest more on research and development so that we can become a powerhouse on electronic sector. The aspect of military-civil fusion, much talked about yesterday, has to make an impact on ground with our industry providing the ruggedized solutions to our challenges in digital domain. Sonar and radar technology have been mentioned as success stories by the speakers during the previous sessions. Thirdly, the military professionals working on technology domain can be embedded in the R&D projects as also with the industrial powerhouses so that their technical expertise coupled with the operational orientation which many of us in uniform have can achieve the desired results. The military's technical institutions like the Military College of Telecommunication, which I head, which has now been designated as a center of excellence, can be nodal centers around which the industry can carry out their research and development and use the power of the vibrant military professionals and the environment about which Dr. Shekhar Dutt had talked about to fast track the developmental efforts. Now, these are the actual areas of civil-military fusion which will be mutually beneficial both to the industry as also to the military. We also have a large pool of excellent professionals with considerable capabilities in domains of artificial intelligence, data analytics, machine learning, etc., with whom both the academia and the industry need to interact with so as to get to know the problem statements and challenges. Here, I find a major deficiency where the industries, especially the DPSUs, don't interact with the military technical institutions. Now we have such a talent pool available in each of these institutions, which can assist both the industry as also those carrying out R&D. While we have our own capabilities, we are carrying out our mutual beneficial exercises with the academia in some of the states, but the industry never reaches out to the technical institutions. So this is a drawback which I have observed, and I think if the industry corrects this, I think it will be a mutually beneficial exercise. A pole vaulting into a fast track mode is feasible, provided all of us work together, and this is where webinars such as this organized by the GCTC will assist the armed forces in the long run. I would conclude here, and I'm extremely grateful to the GCTC for giving me an opportunity to speak here today. More on this, I think we can take on during the discussions which follow after this. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, General. That was a lovely exposure to what is happening at the MCTE, at the Center of Excellence. You brought out some very interesting points, and that is that how do you interface with what is required at the front end, and how are you able to use artificial intelligence to provide that op capability to work within the OODA cycle? That's something very interesting. How will MCTE become a rallying point for the others to come down and say, okay, this is the problem area, this is the data which is available, what level of structured learning or unstructured learning is possible? So maybe MCTE would become a rallying point, at least within the Army. I'm sure about that, because there are a lot of issues related to the capture of data per se, especially in deep learning aspects. Thank you, General. The next topic, which is going to be the expert on Homeland Security. That reminds me what Israel achieved in the Hamas was able to do with artificial intelligence, and that also with commercial packages used on the data from various organizations, and use those packages to come out with very clear targets. That's the way to go. In the case of Homeland Security, we have also now experienced a drone attack on one of the airfields up in the north. Drones up in the air as defenders would require some amount of artificial intelligence to identify these rogue drones. It means the artificial intelligence will have to be forward placed in these small areas, in these small vehicles. We have got some beautiful technologies which are coming in. One of them which comes to my mind is the tiny ML, which is used to move AI into the low-end processors to give you warnings, and then based on those warnings, one can take corrective actions. Maybe more on this by Mr. Michael Chertoff.
Well, thank you, Air Marshal, and I assume I'm audible to everybody. Good.
Yes.
Well, as you probably imagine, artificial intelligence and machine learning is a very big topic in the US. A lot of investment in the area, a lot of discussion about various applications, driving automobiles remotely, use in managing aviation, all kinds of things of that sort. But I'm going to focus on the security elements of it. And let me begin by saying there are really two types of machine learning that we see. The original version, which is still prevalent, is a rule set is created by the designer, and then the machine applies the rules to fact patterns as they arise. But a more sophisticated form of machine learning is organic, where the machine doesn't have a rule set, but has an objective or a set of objectives, and the machine learns over time what the rules or principles would be that will achieve the result. That has the ability to scale much more dramatically than rule-based learning, but it also has embedded within it some risks. And I'm a little bit of a skeptic on artificial intelligence because I'm not quite sure machine learning is yet appropriate to be dignified with the phrase intelligence. Let me give you an example of the problem. For a period of time, apparently Amazon used artificial intelligence or machine learning as a way of screening potential candidates for various jobs at the company. The idea being you could review a huge amount of data on applications and then select people who ought to be brought in for interviews. After a while, somebody noticed that the only candidates being interviewed were white men. And when they went back and tried to understand why that was, they realized that the machines had gone back over a period of time and looked at the history of people who had worked at the company. And because in the old days, it was not a diverse workforce and it tended to be white men, the machine, quote, learned that white men are better at this than others. Of course, that's ridiculous. And that's why Amazon abandoned this as a way of screening. But the cautionary lesson here is to make sure that embedded within machine learning is not being misdirected by a factor that is not really relevant to the objective. And so I think that's one of the reasons we want to be a little bit careful and maybe even skeptical when we apply artificial intelligence too broadly. It's my view, generally speaking, that before you take action of significance, and that would certainly include use of drones to carry out kinetic attacks, there should be a human being that makes the final judgment. To me, the value of so-called artificial intelligence or machine learning is to take huge amounts of data and inputs, some structured and unstructured, and from those discern patterns and perhaps identify things that are red flags or important things for a human being to look at. But at the end of the day, if you're dealing with something that's a matter of life and death, the significance of a pattern or the way one ought to react to something that is highlighted is a matter of human judgment and not something I would delegate entirely to a machine. Although I know there have been some discussions and descriptions of kinetic attacks that have been authorized simply on the basis of a machine determining that a target met certain criteria. But I'd be very careful about that going forward. Let me talk a little bit, though, about some of the use cases that I see artificial intelligence being able to promote, again, bearing in mind that a human being has to be involved before a final decision is made. In the area of counterterrorism, what we're often trying to do is take a lot of inputs about travel, about money flow, and more what is online discussion, and then review all of that huge amount of data, excuse me, to identify who might be a potential terror threat. That is much more data than human analysts can review at a counterterrorism center. So that's an area where inputs based on what you do, what is being done online, what are travel patterns, what are financial flows, all of this can be integrated, analyzed, and then red flags can be raised on those actors who look as if, based on all the inputs, they might be meeting the profile of a terrorist. Another example where we can see a use case for artificial intelligence is cybersecurity. We're dealing with all kinds of cyber attacks on a constant basis. And the problem is when you look at activity that occurs on your network, it's often not possible in real time to see that something is going on the network that is anomalous or potentially threatening. So what we've seen more and more artificial intelligence doing is behavioral analytics. You put a capability on your network, particularly a very large network, to look at behavior and see whether a particular location or a particular IP address is beginning to behave in a way that is unusual or different from the norm. Now, there may be an explanation for that, but again, that might raise a red flag that allows your security officials to inquire, why is this particular IP address all of a sudden doing something different than it's done before? Another example when you deal with cyber is insider threat. If somebody is looking at areas of the network that are not customary or within that person's normal remit from an occupational standpoint, again, there may be an innocent explanation for it, but it may also raise an alarm. So that's an area where if you deal with very large networks, artificial intelligence can be very helpful in focusing the security officials on those particular aspects of behavior that warrant a closer look. A third example is disinformation. And this is coming up now more and more with social media platforms, where we're concerned about the fact that foreign actors like the Russians or the Chinese might be inserting disinformation in the flow of the information on the platform. And we want to know, if we're running the platform, whether that ought to be labeled or even shut down. So if somebody is impersonating somebody legitimate or is pretending to be someone they're not, that might violate the terms and conditions of the platform, and you might then close that account down. The question is, how do you tell? And that's again where artificial intelligence can be useful. If monitoring in real time the behavior of a particular site demonstrates anomalous concentration of messaging or message inputs coming from a number of different suspicious areas, that might suggest you're not dealing with a real person on the platform, but somebody who is either themselves an element of artificial intelligence carrying out a mission, or somebody who's pretending to be someone that they're not. So a lot of the social media platforms now that are trying to separate out foreign adversaries and agents from, let's say, legitimate citizens who are dealing with political issues will use artificial intelligence to determine whether it looks like an algorithm is actually sending the messages or somebody who's not a citizen is, and then that allows them to focus in on whether that particular site needs to be shut down. Finally, as was mentioned earlier, when you deal with surveillance, C4ISR, you have a lot of inputs coming in from a lot of different kinds of sensors. The determination that somebody is attempting to penetrate your defense or carry out a mission, again, in real time, requires you to have the ability to look at a huge amount of data and look for anomalies or behavior that is characteristic of a certain kind of attack. All of these suggest that, again, with appropriate cautions and a reasonable amount of skepticism and care, artificial intelligence has tremendous promise in all kinds of areas of Homeland Security and national security. Finally, let me conclude by saying this. The Chinese, who I know have been a subject of discussion during this conference, have announced that in the next decade, they want to be world leaders in artificial intelligence. The way you do that is you have to build algorithms and formulas, but you also need a lot of data. The way the machine learns is by acquiring huge volumes of data and then applying its algorithms to the data. And that makes the machine smarter, if I can use that expression. That's one of the reasons we in the US have seen the Chinese steal vast amounts of personal data over the last several years. The penetration into the Office of Personnel Management with millions of files being stolen, medical files and health data being stolen from very large insurance companies. This is the kind of data which in the pre-artificial intelligence days would have been useless to a foreign adversary because there's no way they could go through and analyze 100 million different files on individuals. But with big data and big data analytics, a machine can crunch through all that data in real time. And that has two benefits. First, the machine gets smarter. And second, the machine is able now to identify people who might be of interest to the Chinese government or Chinese secret services in a way that would not have been possible if you couldn't analyze that amount of data. That may be looking for data about people who have relatives in China or people who do business in China. There's now discussion about actually using data analytics on DNA and facial recognition as a way of identifying people who either may be of interest or may be coming to China that the Chinese want to watch. So all of this suggests that adversaries and rivals are using this as a counterintelligence and intelligence collection tool, which again means we have to consider artificial intelligence in that light. This is an area that's going to develop much more in the future. I think it's great that this conference is focusing on this, and I look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was a very good exposition of various facets of AI in the counterintelligence domain, as well as the issue of Homeland Security per se. You actually have hit the nail on the head to say that data security is very, very important, because that data which you have could be now used by your adversary to various facial and audio and other methods to be able to exploit it. That's very well accepted. You also raise a very interesting portion about the maturity of AI as of today, the risks associated in deploying AI in systems, the trust which one will have to give on these systems. And as the trust keeps on increasing, you will have more and more autonomous systems for which you can delegate the role of decision making to those systems. And if the trust fails, the AI system fails. So the areas which have to be very important is which are the problem areas in which AI should be taken in. For the military commanders, taking a cue from you, what about traceability? If the decision has been taken by the machine, is there a problem in the chain of command? Who has taken the decision? Has the commander taken a decision, or the machine has taken a decision? If it is going to be based on trust, and if the trust fails, I'm sure the AI system would fail. Securing communications added with information to raise red flags is something which is going to be very, very important in the case of AI. Thank you, Michael. A very interesting exposition. With that, let me take to something a little different. The Indian Navy has been very, very proactive in using a lot of indigenous algorithms. I'm aware way back in the 80s, the sonar processing used to be developed by the students of masters in the various IITs, and they used to develop programs, algorithms based on digital signal processing, and they were deployed on the ships. So once the Navy is hell-bent upon applying the AI into their fields, I'm sure they will do a very, very good job. But let me take the step a little further. One is using the various sensors, machines, platforms to improve their combat ability, to give you better performance. But what about the information? We have got a lot of exercises which we do. We have got a lot of daily sit reps which keep on coming. These sit reps get into the various logbooks, various action taken reports, and they get dumped in the files, maybe electronic files. Today, what is the data which is available there? How do I use that data to make my next tactical moves? How do I use that data to make my next strategic moves at a very different plane level? With the Navy, the ship is a platform by itself, an integral, independent platform. It is as good as a platform which requires all assistance from all assets to take a decision. How will AI help not only in the various sensors and machines and platforms, but in the whole issue of tactics? With that, over to you, Commodore Samada.
So, good evening, sir. Good evening, Mr. Shekhar Dutt, sir. My respects to you. It's wonderful to see you here this evening. Thank you very much. My fellow panelists, thank you very much. I wonder if I have a very short presentation. I don't know if I can share it. Shall I attempt to share it, sir, with your permission?
Okay. Aditya, would that be possible?
I think it looks like it might be possible. So, are you able to see it?
Yes. Yes. Hello.
Can you see it, sir?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yep. Yes.
Okay, so so this is very focused on how artificial intelligence for the Indian Navy can work. So I'm not going to get into a lot of details on what types of AI is there, what is general AI, what is special AI, and what is low AI, many things. But the Defense Science Board in the US identified various things that AI could do and various other things that it could not do. So in deciding where you could use AI and where you should not use AI, they put up this lovely chart, and I thought it makes a lot of sense, where decision speed, the velocity, volume, variety, and veracity of data becomes important. The kind of data links has been spoken about some time ago. The complexity of the actions, and that is particularly in terms of human in the loop, human on the loop, human out of the loop. Those sort of things come up. Dangers of mission, which may determine manned unmanned teaming ideas, and persistence and endurance, which comes in from unmanned systems, which don't get tired and fatigued as the deployment increases. So with these basic ideas, some use cases were identified by the task force which was mentioned. I put them here. I think they are very ambitious ideas, and we have to move towards it in some graduated way. But very specifically, when you look at the AI architecture for military applications, this is a chart that I had prepared, which looks at developing techniques, deploying techniques, designing products, and finally delivering the combat solutions. And this, as you can see from the left-hand side, to the final solution that comes in, it requires a lot of interaction between the techniques which exist in the artificial intelligence domain, whether it's heuristics, the kind of algorithms that we want to do, support vector machine technologies, neural networks, Markov analytics. All of that goes into feeding the deployment techniques which are written out here: cognitive computing, natural language processing, so on and so forth. Then you have tools, and then you have certain underlays, and then you have certain overlays, and all of that put together to give various sort of combat solutions in intelligent surveillance, operation logistics, condition-based maintenance, or predictive maintenance, as we want to say. How to bring in more accurate and precise long-range precision fire, deception operations, threat monitoring, combat simulation, combat medicine, and increasingly being able to profile the mind of the enemy commander. I think that is one of the things that used to be one of the fogs of war, what was in the mind of the enemy commander. But after he does his 15th click on Facebook or any social media, his complete profile is mapped, and it's possible to predict how a particular person will react to a particular stimulus. So there's plenty of things happening there. There's some way down the line, but this is just a sense of in the short time that we have what can be done. Now, going straight into how can we use AI? We spoke about AI mostly in a combat role, but there, as Air Marshal Supreme Singh also brought out, sir, my chairman, in this session, that you can do a lot of AI in just making life easier. And for a ship, one of the key requirements is to reduce your crew, because every sailor or officer on board creates a certain load on the system, and which finally impacts on the overall combat capability of a ship or such a formation. So one of the things is mail. I think all of us who have spent time in command have been overwhelmed by mail, but it's quite possible to completely automate this whole mail system so that the recipient is identified, the intra-mail goes out here, so you don't have to sign here for action by so-and-so and staff officer do this and all that. That entire thing can be very, very easily done. We all manage budgets and we have to build up cases, we have to manage finances. This whole thing can be very easily given to a AI-enabled system with a dashboard summary. This is very, very easy to do. Then you have reports. And I think what we spoke about some time ago is that there are a lot of data which is all over the place. So you can actually pull this data and use what we call as wordsmith quality publishing to pull all that data and make those reports which are intelligent. So when it goes to the next higher authority, he is able to disaggregate that data and put it into the right place where it matters. So fleet headquarters, command headquarters are not going to get loads of reports. So out of that report, the relevant part is pushed to the appropriate staff, and he is able to action on those sort of things. And further from that data that he picks up from every unit for a ship or an aircraft or whatever systems are there, he can identify trends, and that trend analysis will actually make that formation more stronger. This is very, very easy to do. The second part, of course, is gangway and perimeter security. For the last 40 years of my life, we have seen the same gangways on ships, which is the way by which you have to board a ship. But you can make very intelligent telescopic gangways, which is fitted with computer vision, LED apples. It automatically calculates the tide, the currents, everything else, and it also has profiles of who's coming in and what's not coming in. The entire entry system of entering a ship, who's leaving a ship there, who's leaving a ship out, particularly in submarines, is very important, because every person who leaves the ship or leaves the submarine or enters the submarine adds weight to the ship, weight to the hull. So the balance and all of those needs to be very, very carefully calculated. This whole business of monitoring people on board, who's coming, who's going, is very, very easy to do by using AI. And these are simple solutions which can make life so much easier, which can be automated. For example, all the databases that you have, what time is sunrise, what time is sunset, what is the tidal date, wind, weather, drought, all this can be pulled from various open source intelligence data, put onto a LED screen, and you have this information for everybody at any time that you want. Then, of course, personal management. We have got a whole lot of records, and as divisional officers and commanding officers, one of the more important responsibilities is to talk to your men, and you try and judge that man, the soldier or that officer, in terms of his traits and his profiling, and accordingly you counsel him to become a better soldier, a better air warrior, or a better sailor. Much of that can be actually assisted by very smart, simple AI-assisted personal management programs. We also have discipline and welfare things of award of medals and badges which are with the ships, the leave records, routine promotions, all of that sort of thing. And training and proficiency. We can fill up the whole logbooks as to who's fired which weapon, when, and how was that done. But to determine a particular trend over a period of time, just to give you an example, whether a person is a very good shooter with a LMG, or he's a very good shooter with a 9mm pistol. This can be determined, and accordingly you can use that talent. Is he a good firefighter? Does he have an intuitive sense of doing damage control in firefighting, which requires different types of skills and capabilities? For example, asphyxiation. Does he have some sort of phobias in working in claustrophobic environments where you actually do DC and firefighting? So we can bring in all those profiling, make a more competent ship as she sails out to sea. Logistics. I think logistics, we have already done a fair amount of work in the Navy. We already have a fully automated management system for logistics and a financial management. The first, I think, in the three services. I was fortunate to be associated with it in 2009 when Sir was around, and earlier, I think, 2006. And so many of the logistics problems can be solved, including designing a menu to and calculating the amount of foodstuff that you need on a ship, and to deliver the required calories to each person. This can be done. Then you can also bring in the management of rotables of aircraft, which have to go back for maintenance and be brought back into the spare parts loop by being able to track it. And not only blockchain, you can use many other barcoding and any other QR coding technologies for it to be tracked at all times, to give you a real-time feedback on what's happening. Quite simply, what many of the commercial technologies are doing. I'll come to that. Operational planning. I think operational planning is what interests us most, and particularly designing training programs for ships, fleets, and all of that is very, very important, because each unit has its own strengths and its own weaknesses. So as the fleet commander, if you actually know that this ship needs to do more anti-submarine workup and this other chap should be more anti-missile drills, so you can schedule the exercises and the programs at sea, because time is at a huge premium, and even 24 hours at sea is very, very less at some times. So to optimally use this time at sea, the targets that you get, the windows of operations that you get, to actually work the resource requirements and assign the resources for each ship to deliver to its performance and its crew and its equipment, the state of the equipment, all that can be done. Finally, when all this is logged and put together, these reports can be automatically generated. And from those automated reports, you can actually see what strengths and weaknesses are there, what operational areas requiring attention, and how the fleet as a combat unit is performing. How did we do for anti-submarine warfare as a fleet? How did we do for air defense? How did we do disaster management? Whatever else fleets do. Then maintenance. Now today you have the kind of logbooks which I used to sign as the captain of a ship. I could never figure out why am I signing millions of these logbooks. So I used to be told that these logbooks have one primary data requirement, and that is that comes in most useful if you collide or crash or some damn thing happens which requires a court martial or a board of inquiry, and that's why these logbooks are maintained. But even then, if you scrutinize these logbooks, whether they are in machinery rooms or engine rooms, they have a huge amount of valuable data, and the most important part of that data, it's labeled data. So you are now able to convert that labeled data into plenty of things. To give you an example of using a civilian algorithm for predictive maintenance, and this is a conversation I've had with some of my friends who are in this. We have an international consortium of sort of busybodies who are looking at AI and satellite technologies. So this gentleman who runs a company in the US told me, what is the problem? He had no clue about the armed forces or something. He said, what is your problem? I said, look, I want to know about how do I do predictive maintenance of aero engines. He said, what's the problem? So I said, I have got these data. So he thought for some time. He said, yeah, I've got a ready-made algorithm for it. I said, you got a ready-made algorithm for it? What is it? He said, we have done this work for a hospital in Germany, which looks at the morbidity rates of persons suffering from heart attacks. I said, yes. So he said, whatever parameters you have given me, engine pressure, lube oil pressure, this temperature, exhaust gas temperature, how many times the mechanics saw that system, how many times the officers saw it, and how many times the consultant saw it, how many times the base guy saw it. All that data is available to you. The same thing applies to the medical field. So those algorithms which are being used for medical predictions using those technologies can be just minorly tweaked to bring about AI requirements for aero engines. Similarly, for crack propagation. Now, crack propagation on highways is what is being used for determining crack propagation in structures today in the US again, and some people have worked on that. So there are very interesting things. We can talk about it in the question and answer session. Future at sea, I think the most important thing that's going to happen is being able to combine satellite-based ISR technologies with what's happening at sea today. Because for example, today you can do, let me give you an example. Today you can actually track a ship when it leaves a particular harbor all the way till it comes down. And that combines with, synthetic aperture radar, very interference photogrammetric methods, AIS systems, RF sensors on satellites. All of that combined together makes the ocean a very, very transparent medium today. So it's very little place to hide. And so some of the operations that we talk about, which requires us to have stealth and many of these other features, become very sort of dated, because those strengths that we thought existed in submarines, for example. One of the ways, once they have certain kind of blue lasers in place, we'll be able to actually detect submarines by a variety of means, from the weight that they produce, from the differences in temperature that exists between a nuclear powered submarine's hull and the external bodies. So lots of interesting things are possible there. And I think in summary, I just want to say this here, it's operational effectiveness, better weapon to target matching. I need to mention this here for the Army. We are doing a project on using satellite-based technologies for agriculture. Now this requires you to determine soil health, hygiene, moisture content, and soil strength. So when we are having a discussion here, one of the things that came up is, if you can determine soil strength, you can also determine how that soil strength will hold for mechanized forces. So you have algorithms for soil strength matching. You can actually determine which would be the best place for a bridgehead across the Ichugilchik Canal or the ditch buns by using satellite-based soil strength and soil health characteristics. You can also know how the hinterland is working. The next stage of it was even more interesting, that you can use a cab hailing system. The algorithm that we use for cab hailing can be used again for weapon to target matching. It's amazing. And then you can actually bring in algorithms from FedEx, which is what is used by FedEx. You can use algorithms that is done by Big Basket or Amazon to look at your entire logistics of waging mechanized warfare. This is something that we are working on, and take us a little time, but it's very clear that we can do it. It's very, very easy to do it. So my key takeaway would be that the future is, of course, going to be joint. I have to admit here that I don't think a silo-based approach will work. The same algorithm that we use for, let's say, maintenance of aero engines will be the same that you use for a tank engine, the same that you use for a ship engine or a generator or anything like that. The crack propagation and other things that you use for aircraft will be the same thing that you would use on a ship. Similarly, much of the AI that we'll use for smarter warehousing, logistics, personal management are all common. So it's very, very important for us to have a joint artificial intelligence concept where there has to be, I'm sorry to say this, but we have to have young people there. We can't have fossils like us who sit there and work on, no. And much of these algorithms are being developed by the day in universities, by entrepreneurs and innovators. So all that you need to do as the service is to be able to connect these dots. I gave you these examples of how you can use a cab hailing system, how you can use a medical health program, how can you use FedEx programs, how can you use Amazon warehousing solutions. All those programs exist. There is no need to rediscover the wheel. Whatever we do in the armed forces today is all done, and most of that technology exists in the civilian world. And I dare say they are far, far ahead of us in terms of their potential and their application in India, between the civil side and the military side. So, of course, in the future, we'll get to see more manned and unmanned teams. In fact, we put together a proposal for, and this is where Mr. Shekhar Dutt may be particularly interested, is that we are now on the verge of designing a system that can do robotic detection and let's say defeating of anti-personnel mines using extremely precise UAVs, which can hover with millimetric level accuracy in flight. So that is possible. And this comes in because the fusion between artificial intelligence, sensors, communication technologies, and the sensors are all embedded in this one system. So it maps the area, it uses computer visions to make sure that it doesn't collide with boulders and grass hoppings, etc. We can do that. The sensor package is an established sensor which uses a combination of acoustics and ground penetration radar to detect mines, and all these technologies are being brought in from other places. The same technology is being used for detection of pipelines and optical fire cables which have been put into places. So there's a lot of exciting future. I feel I wish I was 20 years younger. Looking at man and man teaming concepts, we have seen big success in this in the recent years. We have seen live virtual and constructive training being done, where actually the pilot in the aircraft gets all this thing when he's flying the aircraft rather than sitting on ground. Of course, natural language processing and computer vision is something we can put it in a tank. I mean, you can ask the question to the driver instead of asking the question to the tank commander or the driver. You can ask Alexa, and Alexa will tell you where the enemy is. The same logic works here. Then, of course, profiling the enemy commander, and I think this is something that I have to be really cautious in saying. But I think there is some major advances which have been done in profiling the enemy commander and being able to predict how that commander would react to a particular situation, and increasingly so in diplomatic negotiations and commercial negotiations that's happening in the world. This is where AI technologies are moving in. I'm very bullish on this technology. We have some gaps, but I'm sure if you all put our shoulder to the wheel, we'll see some very bright guys putting in their bit into this to make us a real AI power, because that's what we really need to win wars and make our country better in a holistic way. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and I'm sorry I may have exceeded the time, but thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Commodore Samadad. That was a very elaborate and a very excellent presentation. In fact, I'm sure all your inputs would go down to the Navy, and like the Navy always does, they would be in a position to do all those innovations, build up the knowledge of the AI at that level itself and implement it. I'm very sure about that. Very interestingly, you brought about the profiling of the commander. That's something which is very, very big. Like it was the previous speakers talked about behavioral analysis. And this is a transparency of an individual to the world today. And that's where AI does come in. Predictive analysis, adverse event management. How do we do that? Take it further. What is the op cycle of the engine? It could be the aero engine, which could thereafter be used to design a further engine to say, this is the op cycle which I want to use. Similarly for the ships. So AI has got huge potential. It's only that we have to decide as to what we want to do. But very lucidly brought out. Logistics, very interesting. Pattern generation of the consumptions. But the moot point is, there has to be a disruptive thinking process at the Ministry of Defense to ensure that we do not stick to the anarchic Second World War provisioning methods. That's something which I'm sure should be a takeaway, to say that with AI, with consumption patterns available across the board on the EMALs in the Indian Air Force and on the material management in the Navy, it is possible now to be able to do provisioning at a much economic and a much more efficient manner. That's very interesting. Similarly, on the EMMS on the Indian Air Force and the logbooks getting E in the Navy, there is a huge potential of using AI. Again, at the level of the services itself, which will generate confidence, will get the knowledge up, and will be able to do innovative algorithms in-house. And I'm sure when the next the Naval Day and the Air Force Day and the Army Day in which you have normally got one shamiana and one place where to demonstrate the innovations which have been undertaken, I'm sure the next time there would be innovations on the AI by the Army, by the Navy, and I'm sure about the Air Force. Civil military cooperation, use of commercial software. How does the military come to know about it? It is through these think tanks and seminars. So there has to be more amount of interaction, which sadly is lacking as of now. But I'm sure the military commanders, with the new jest of using AI, there would be some steps taken to ensure that this synergy does take place. Thank you, Commodore Samadar. That was very informative. Now we have got Mr. Shiv Kumar from the BEL production agency, and I'm sure since AI is a multidisciplinary issue, it is not only going to be limited to what we are talking about, it is in other aspects as well. And I may dare say that if the reliability of the components of the system can be foretold much earlier to take a proactive action to ensure that it remains online, is something where your AI can play huge dividends, particularly communication systems. Over to you, Mr. Shiv Kumar.
Yes, sir. Well said. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and my eminent panelists. I think I'm being honored to be among the very glad speakers which have brought in the very correct perspective of the data analytics and the artificial intelligence in the defense perspective. So if you see the AI context and the level of criticality, which differs from industry to industry, whether it is a transport, there is a one level of criticality which is required from the AI systems. If it is automotive, another way of learnings from there. And then if you take it to the commercial segment, there's a different level of criticality there. So if you see this and bring back to the defense perspective, as earlier speaker said, so it has to be mission critical. That's one thing. And time critical. These are real-time or near real-time systems, and they are safety critical, where the lives are there. So when you collaborate all these things, we want AI systems to be require faster identification and timely action. As Mr. Sukhdev Singh told, the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and act loop, has to be reduced with the concern of the AI inputs. How much we can bring down the OODA loop? That's the question here. So the data delivery, the reliable notification, and warning and alerts are important aspects in this domain to take it into the AI into the defense perspective. If you think on these points, the key differences in mission critical AI applications are the prime about the accuracy. How accurate the AI systems are. It is on the fancier domain, for example, face recognition or the object detection. Yes, we have deliberately at the universities, they have done a very good job on the open source using technologies to detect an object and the face recognition, the object. So those things are fine. But when it comes to the mission critical defense applications, the accuracy, how much accuracy you are, and how speed you are actually getting into the detection or the things. Then the scalability as the different applications, various sensors and various other subsystems. How do you integrate to increase the scalability of the AI systems? It's also one of the point. And most importantly, the security aspects. How your AI engines or the AI data is not being attacked or been tackled by the enemy forces. These are other things. Otherwise, you build an AI system which has been used by the other data. So that's not correct. So how you build in the security here? That's another point. So all in all, what I can put is from detection to decision making, how it greatly transforms the AI. That's the key point which we have to take it at this point. And coming back to the industry perspective, what actually we are facing challenges are the AI components in mission critical application. We need use data sets. For example, we have a very good industry or the open source based or academic based data sets available for the common objects. How do you generate as a government of India or India this one? So how do you take the mission critical or the defense data sets, whether it be military tankers, identifying drones or various soldiers, troops? The data set of the AI has to be created for the military domain. That's a huge challenge. So we could have a common data set pool. The hardware and the sensor, as earlier brought out by some of the speaker. So the edge analytics, you cannot send all the data which has been captured from the edge devices to the cloud-based systems. So you lose the latency here, transferring them and then taking the decision and coming back to take actions. It has to be on the edge. So you need processor and hardware, the computing CPUs and the graphic processing units. You have to take some kind of a storage also into the edge. So you have to, for example, predictive analytics on the past, what has happened, and how do you want to predict in the future. You need storage also on the edge. And the data collected by the sensors has to be stored and processed intelligently. So the data can be done on the edge. Or how do you send, for example, a data which is a stream analytics, you take it onto the edge analytics. From there, for the later processing part of it, you send it to the cloud, get a bigger incentive of that. So that's another key point which you have to see. And where are the data sources coming from? One is a machine generated data. This includes data by inter-allied forces, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, battlefield surveillance, radars, satellites, and sensors. And the human generated data, maybe the speech command, the points, the map points which they are bringing in, or the short notes or a text messages which is sent. This comes under the category of human generated data. And the third party generated data, like it's kind of a electronic transactions, demographics, or the meteorology data, which comes from the third party sources, which also again linkable for deriving the intelligent reports for the military. As you said, these data again, as from the commercial market, transferred into the military domain with the same that 5 V's of the big data: the voluminous, the variety, the velocity, which the data comes in from various sources, the veracity, and the derived value out of these data. Again, all the data may not be meaningful. So taking an incentive to which is useful data to go into a analysis of the predictions. So this has to be very carefully dealt with. Otherwise, all the big data, the processing, the needed processing has to be utilized for a correct and meaningful data. If you come back to the big data analytics, as we said, there's the descriptive analytics where actually you will see the past data and then what happened can be useful to establish a trend. And then the predictive analytics where actually you will predict the future trends used on the data. And then the prescriptive analysis. Have you predicted the data? What is your response or the course of action? So those comes into the next stage of things which we require or build systems based on that. And our AI agents has to be autonomous. Agents may perform their own decision making and need not to necessarily comply with commands and requests from other entities. It has to be autonomous if at all is useful. And it has to be proactive. Agents need not wait for commands and requests and may initiate actions on their own. So that has to be very clear here. And then it can be interactive also, wherever the coexistence or the wherever the human and machine intelligence has come, then it can be on the interactive side also. Having said that, if we put across the layers of the AI system, how will make it up? So then we have a sensor layer where this hardware, the IoT, the military IoT or the defense IoT comes in, the edge analytics, and then we have a communication layer. So once this big data comes in, you cannot handle everything on the edge. Then you need a very well-driven communication layer, apart from the built-in security there. So wired, wireless, SATCOM, so radios, links. So these kind of communication layers have to be there. And then
sorry, Mr. Shiv.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Shiv Kumar.
Yeah.
Could you wind up in about say 3 minutes?
Yeah, sure, sir, sure. So yeah, and then once the data has been sent there on the cloud services layer, so we need again a computing, storage, and the networking layers there. And then once the data layer, so you have to multiple variety of data, you have to transform, model it, and then to be used for the interoperability of various AI-based systems. Then finally comes the visualization layer where actually you'll put into a very descriptive visualization board where actually we can get a meaningful variety after that. So considering this, actually what we are in Bharat Electronics, we have been working on various C4ISR applications, whether it is a border surveillance system, border management system, and then the image and video analytics where the AI comes in very handy. They are building on a lot of image data, event sensing and data fusions. and intelligent agents for command services, and the fuel and ammunition supply or the logistic, as previous speaker has brought out, monitoring vital statistics of troops of the defense personnel. So the health monitoring data, as again, can be a lot of AI can be there to maintain the health of the persons, and AI-based cyber security, energy consumption and patterns of the military, and autonomous sensor network for surveillance. These are some of the AI applications we can bring in. To summarize, as all the speakers have felt, AI-enabled systems are becoming smarter and more intelligent. AI technology certainly helps in the decision-making process to achieve better outcome. Big data combined with AI will help in solving issues about operations, training, and other activities. And timely updation and analysis of data will also greatly improve situational awareness for providing a precision, common operating pictures, thereby adding in decision making. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shiv Kumar. Excellent. That was very good. Mission, time, and safety critical. Thereafter, once you have applied AI on it, the trust in this system must be there. Trust, the moment there is trust, you could have autonomous AI agents moving in. Testing of such systems for their actual performance is going to be a big challenge with AI-enabled systems, more so with the airborne systems. I am sure we will have to go back to the various developers as to how do we design the VNV systems to ensure that this AI is actually meeting the operational requirements, and how will the testing data be different from the so-called learning data. As of now, AI believes in partitioning that data into the learning data and the testing data. So how do we do this is going to be another field by itself, but very excellent. Thank you very much, Shiv Kumar, for this lovely exposition.
Thank you.
Now we move, thank you. Now we move to a very interesting presentation by Mr. Grant Newsom, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. On, I'm sure, what are the Chinese doing as far as AI is concerned. All our ears and mind is open for you, Mr. Grant. Over to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, sir, for the opportunity. What I'm going to talk about is Chinese economic power. And I want you to consider how potential Chinese dominance of the AI and really other advanced technology markets and industries feeds into Chinese economic power. And their economic power is as big a threat as their military power. It's pretty simple that Chinese economic strength equals political power, and that ties into military power. How is that? If your economy is humming, you're earning money, which funds your defense buildup, and a government doesn't have to choose between guns and butter. This economic clout also shapes perceptions as well. You're seen as a powerful, rising country. It attracts friends. People want to be with you. And your adversaries, like the Americans, the Indians, they start to get worried and even intimidated. And keep in mind that to the Chinese, that economic activities and military activities or defense activities are pretty much the same thing. It all ties into this concept of national strength. And so what you've got, if you look around the Indo-Pacific, and I would say look almost anywhere on Earth, that just about every country thinks that its prosperity depends on China. There's this belief that you just got to have access to the Chinese market. You've got to plug into Chinese demand or attract Chinese money, either investment, aid, tourism. But it is useful to look back 30 years and remember when the Chinese economy wasn't much to speak about. So this isn't like a thousands of year old thing. But as part of this effort towards political dominance and military dominance, there's the Belt and Road Initiative, which has been talked about. The principal feature of this is, of course, infrastructure and commercial projects throughout the Indo-Pacific, but Latin America, Africa, Central Asia, Eastern Europe. Now, the BRI has two aspects. One is a financial aspect, and the other is strategic and political. The Chinese would like to make money, but it's also an opportunity for them to put otherwise idle companies and laborers to work. But as I said, there's a strategic political aspect. And as long as the Chinese get access, position, and create dependency, they don't care about the financial results. It cost them $586 million to lease the port of Darwin in Australia as part of the Belt and Road. That was a bargain. They don't care. What the cost of getting countries to de-recognize Taiwan, flip over to China, once again, doesn't matter what you spend, getting the port of Piraeus, priceless. And most of these projects, or many of them, particularly if it's a port or an airfield or transportation operation, it's got a dual use. It has a military usefulness, and it feeds into China's growing power projection. Now, what do the recipient countries think about this? Now, we often hear, particularly from the US side, that, well, it's debt trap diplomacy, it's predatory lending, and yeah, that's true. All of these deals are opaque. They're stacked overwhelmingly in Chinese favor, and every single one of them has got corruption just all over it. But you look closer and you'll hear the locals tell you, well, what else are we supposed to do? And you can cite cases of local leaders just saying, we're not doing this by choice, but we don't have any options. And it's also worth considering that it isn't just the Belt and Road. A long time before this, for decades, Chinese commercial activities have been all over the place, and in places where, I'll say from an American perspective, the Americans won't go anymore. But one example, Tonga. Already, after the Chinese control about 80% of retail businesses, right down to the corner shop, and this is with recently arrived people. So what Chinese economic strength and commercial activity does, it creates dependency, it gets them influence, and it also builds resentment. But it isn't all smooth sailing for the Chinese, because they've got some problems. One of the big one is their currency is not convertible, and that presents a huge problem. If you want to do anything overseas or get anything from overseas, you've got to pay for it in currency somebody wants. So China's problem is just a degree different than what Zimbabwe faces. So if China wants to buy companies, many of them with military uses or AI uses, advanced technology companies, they've got to pay for it in money somebody wants. If they want to buy property, ports, airfields, they've got to pay for it in dollars, yen, euros, or sometimes Swiss francs. And if they want to buy influence, most people aren't going to take the money in Chinese yuan. So all of this overseas activity, unfortunately, a huge part of it is made possible because US, Western, and Japanese companies are pumping hard currency into China at a rate you just cannot believe. It's probably $300-400 billion a year. And that papers over a lot of problems for a country, and also makes it look more successful than it really is. It leads to the investors applying pressure on their home governments. US, UK, Germany, Japan, for example, and they're telling them, don't upset China, don't get them mad. So you see the vulnerability of China, but given the trend in Chinese military buildup, which is pretty good, the US dollar is the last major club the Americans have over the PRC. And Beijing is keen to eliminate it, and they're trying in a number of ways, digital currencies, very sophisticated payment systems, swap arrangements, talking up the Chinese currency, talking down the dollar. This is all intended to present the yuan as a desirable currency, weaken faith in the US dollar. And that's once they've done that, then we are in a lot of trouble. Now, the US government's current response to COVID, of course, spending money like really drunken sailors irresponsibly and debasing the currency. This is exactly what China wants us to do. And you can see I'm not the most optimistic guy on earth, but looking out, say, 20 years, Is China going to go from strength to strength? Will they dominate? Will they control the AI market, the 5G market, 6G market, 7G? Is that what's going to happen? Could be, but there's also the Chinese economy has some real weaknesses that belie this positive Chinese pressure message that you hear. The Chinese haven't figured out some new way to run an economy that nobody else has in the last 5,000 years, nor have they discovered principles of economics nobody knows about. They face risks from bad debt, inflation, the same thing that brought down the KMT, loss of confidence in an economy. It affects the Chinese just as much as anyone, lack of foreign exchange, being sanctioned, and also the fact that the Chinese market is subject entirely to the whim of the Chinese Communist Party. So really only an idiot would invest in there with somebody else's money. But also consider that the Chinese they've got a futures market going. And this is how I would describe it. For decades, any Chinese person who tries to get their money out of the country, away from the Chinese Communist Party, and put it into America, Australia, Canada. Now that is like a futures market where the people who are most successful in that system don't have enough faith in its future prospects. And they also like to get a relative out with a green card. And also let the Chinese currency, let it float for 3 weeks and see what happens. I don't think it'd be just a flood out of the country. Now, there's also some talk of decoupling. I think there's even something called the India, Australia, Japan Supply Chain Resilient Initiative, and also the Quad is talking about doing economic things. But nonetheless, that particularly Western constituency of commercial, financial interests, and the politicians they fund, that we used to call Quislegs, they don't want to pull back from China. So we've got a problem there. And I'm sure India, you have your own equivalents of ours, the people yapping to not upset the Chinese and losing access to the Chinese market. So we got some problems. But so to change this trajectory, it's going to require the free nations to offer some real alternatives, and we're going to have to increase the proscriptions on investing in or taking money from China. Things like that you all did, like banning Chinese apps. Well, that was nice. It was good, and it showed what can be done, but it is about 1/10,000th of what needs done. The Japanese are funding companies to get out of China, but at the same time, Toyota's rushing all in. The U.S. has blacklisted some companies, made it harder to list on the New York exchanges, and yet we let a Chinese high-tech firm do an IPO yesterday that gives them billions and billions of dollars that you go out and buy more technology companies from overseas, what you're not going to steal. The Americans put together the Blue Dot Network, and the G7 recently came up with this Build Back Better World. This is, don't like to be cynical, but this is stand-up comedy. And I would note that right up to World War II, when the shooting started, U.S. companies were heavily invested in both Germany and Japan. So it's going to take
Mr. Grant, could you wind up, please? We are already quite late today.
Okay, then I am
Maybe another, maybe.
Okay, if we stay on this trajectory and free countries don't wake up, China is going to make this decision about both economics and the military for us. So that's it. Thank you. I rushed right through it as fast as I could.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. I think you could have spoken for another 10 minutes. We would have loved to be with you, but it's quite late. We are actually overshot our time. We started late, no doubt about it. And perfectly okay. Very good insight about the Chinese economy, how to use the economic power to project valiantly the military power. Very interesting. Create dependency, and we have seen lots and lots of examples where the dependencies and the vulnerabilities has been exploited without military interventions. Very good. How does it affect the AI and the 5G market? We'll have to see. Because AI, they have already announced that they are going to be leaders in AI. 5G, yes again. How do we address that so that they don't steamroll into the world is something which we'll have to be careful about, how the countries react to it. US dollar elimination for the yen to become a currency of worth is something which we'll have to see. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Thank you very much for your lovely exposition. I think we have already overshot the time. I don't think so we could have any question answer session, but I must give at least a minute to all to put in your last comments, please. Dr. Shekhar Dutt, sir, last comments, 1 minute.
No, I think one big comment is that we know the importance of all technology, and AI, big data, machine learning, and everything is offshoot of different kind of technology, and we should see the whole rather than the part. And therefore, I think as far as India is concerned, as far as the services are concerned, the users should be able to have a say in the kind of vulnerability that they have and how can the vulnerability be removed. In the Navy, I've seen, because I was Director Navy in the 1980s, Navy has a very well compact, like naval warships are a world by itself, and everything, every information, every bit of information, and the information from logistics to operations, everything is there, and you have to take operation decisions. Navy has a directorate called Directorate of Naval Design, DGND. And I've seen how it works, and it has very intensive collaboration with every project, naval project, and also then in the operations side. I think the other services should have. Now the Army has also got the basics of designing institution, but I think the Air Force requires it very badly. And I think then on top of it, and we had put this system called CISC or the IDS, and over there in the IDS, so the communication is concerned, I think the SONC's position as the chief coordinator of all communication, and it should be like we have DGDIA, we should have SONC or a person like him or an officer of that in the IDS, so that the need to know basis you could speak, you could have all the information shared. Or if you want to have some exclusive, each service can have, or for that matter, each platform can have its own communication system. But as far as being part of a formation, part of a system, I think communication should be such. And I think the takeaway is that that your knowledge about AI and all thing added to it must be used to your advantage and not scare you in immobilizing you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. May I request General sir?
So we sometimes tend to simplify or think on or process on artificial intelligence. So in the military domain, the challenges in AI domain are completely different, and we should not equate it with what is there in the civil domain, especially on commercial issues. Now, while you could look at administrative and logistics for a way ahead and compare it with what is available in the civil, let me also remind you that we have not been able to implement a smart traffic system in India because there are no rules like in operations on land. So if we are unable to even have a smart traffic management system in Indian roads, because as per rules, a vehicle on right is supposed to run right, but it doesn't happen in our country, unfortunately. So the military domain, the operational domain is so challenging, and the complexities are immense. So while it is okay to compare what are the challenges in civil domain, and equate it with what is available. But I feel that the challenges in military domain are completely different. That's all I have to say, sir, and thank you very much.
Thank you, General. Mr. Michael?
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I particularly was interested in Grant's discussion about geopolitical competition with China, which is taking place along a whole host of domains, not just military, but technological and financial as well. And I think AI will be part of that competition. So I think the United States and India, as allies, need to work together to enable both countries to continue to be competitive and to resist the possibility of China dominating this very important technology. Thank you very much, everybody. I know it's late. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Commodore Samadar, sir?
Thank you. I think we have had some very interesting presentations. But of course, there are many challenges to the employment of artificial intelligence. And one of them is this mindset that we seem to possess, increasingly so, that the military is some completely different beast and the rest of the world is a different beast. I think there can be nothing further than that. You know, the kind of systems that exist in the commercial world are far, far more advanced than what is existing in the armed forces. It's important to look out of this well and see what technologies are available in the commercial side, how successfully they have been utilized there, and tweak those results to our benefit. Of course, there will be the challenges to employment of AI. Mindset is a very important point. The kind of innovation cycles that we have and the periodicity of those inducting those equipments have to be very, very radically different. Today, we have a concept where we are looking at satellites being replaced in space every 3 years. Earlier we were just looking at doing a satellite in the space was supposed to be there forever, but we can look at that. Legal and ethical issues are there in the application of AI, particularly on lethal autonomous weapon systems and how we can use that. There's risk, there's human factors, of course, oversight. So there are many challenges there, but I think it's important for us to identify the low-hanging fruits which will make our services more efficient so that we reduce costs, make our systems more efficient. We can get to warfighting subsequently. Man-on-man teaming is now a very clearly done thing. All-domain warfare has already been spoken of at great length in some of the other armed forces. We can certainly bring those in. My sense would be to try and do the things that we can easily first, and then as we build more confidence in the system, we should go forward with it. Thank you very much for being here, and it was wonderful listening to all of you. I certainly learned a lot from today's discussions. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commodore Samadar. Over to you, Mr. Shiv Kumar. Short one.
Yes, sir. Just I want to bring up 2 points. One is the self-sustenance in the AI computing engines. We cannot import the hardware AI computing engine from China and then build application on top of that. So we should have an entire stack which is in-house, indigenously built out. And the second thing is the collaboration. Actually, we are building with a parallel approach as MCT has brought out, and the technology departments of the 3 tri-services and the DPSUs. Jointly, we should have the programs where actually, the built-in on the strength, actually Bell can do the hardware out of it and the other technology houses, the software and other modules. So that the collaborative and the self-sustenance is the key. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Shiv Kumar. Over to you, Mr. Grant.
Okay, this is short. Don't let our enemies get an advantage over us, and stop funding them, for crying out loud. That's it. So, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. All that's left for me to say is I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to each one of the distinguished panelists. My sincere thanks and sincere appreciation. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think the dinner for the Indians should be now on the table. And the breakfast is already late. Maybe the lunch is on. Thank you. Take care. God bless.